Smoke covered the sky like a black curtain. The ground was broken, littered with fire, twisted metal, and the faint echo of screams fading into silence. The war was over, but the battlefield still breathed. Heavy, wounded, alive among the ruins. An alien medic named Saralyn moved carefully, her hands shaking, her pale green eyes scanning the dead and dying. Her scanner blinked weakly, searching for life. But every tone it gave was another sign of death. Saralyn pressed a hand to her chest, whispering a short prayer in her language. She had never seen such destruction. The humans had fought like storms, fierce and endless, and now everything was silent. She thought the battle had taken them all. But then her scanner beeped, a faint sound in the static. One heartbeat still alive, faint but steady. She followed the signal across the ruins, stepping over wreckage and broken armor. Then she saw him, a human soldier lying against a shattered piece of wall, his arm twisted in a way no body should bend, his chest armor cracked, blood running down his face, yet his eyes were open, calm, steady, almost defiant. Saralyn dropped to her knees beside him. "Don't move," she said quickly, voice trembling. "You're badly injured." "I can—" Before she could finish, the human moved. He grabbed his wrist with his other hand, took a deep breath, and it with a sound like thunder, snapped the bone back into place. The sound made her freeze. Her stomach turned, her eyes wide with horror. The man gritted his teeth but didn't scream, didn't even flinch. He exhaled slowly, his face calm. "There," he muttered, "better." Saralyn could only stare, her hands shaking. You broke your arm again," she stammered. He looked up at her, his eyes tired but sharp. "No," he said. "I fixed it," she wanted to argue, to tell him it was impossible, but her voice caught in her throat. He was already tearing a strip from his torn uniform, wrapping his arm tight like a makeshift splint. Blood soaked through the fabric, but his hands never trembled, Saralyn whispered. "You should be unconscious," he gave a faint smile. "Pain keeps me awake." For a moment she forgot the battlefield, forgot the smoke. All she could see was this broken human refusing to fall. She reached for her med kit, her hands still shaking. "Please, let me help you," she said softly. He looked at her with a strange calm. "You can try." As she worked, she saw the scars along his arms, old burns and cuts that told stories of past battles. She realized he was not new to pain. He had lived with it, walked through it, and made it part of him. "Your people," she whispered. "How do you survive this?" He looked at the sky, the smoke curling above them. "We don't survive because we're unhurt," he said quietly. "We survive because we don't stop." Saralyn's scanner beeped again. More life signs nearby. She turned to look, but he grabbed her wrist. "Don't," he said. She frowned. "Why?" "Enemy," he said simply. She froze, fear spreading through her. "But the battle is over." He shook his head. "Not for them." And then the sound came. Faint footsteps. Distant but moving closer, Saralyn's heart raced, her hands shaking harder. "We have to move," she whispered. The human tried to stand, pain flashing across his face. His leg buckled, clearly broken. But he pushed himself upright anyway. She caught him, gasping at his weight. "You can't walk," she said. "I'll crawl," he replied, his voice rough but steady. They moved slowly through the ruins, her supporting him, his arm around her shoulders. Every step was pain, but he never made a sound. Each breath came heavy, but he never stopped. When they reached a half-collapsed shelter, Saralyn guided him inside. He slumped against the wall, his breathing harsh but his eyes still sharp. She tried to patch the wound on his side, but he stopped her hand. "No time," he whispered. "They're coming." She looked out through the crack in the wall, shadows moving between the smoke. Her people's enemies, searching the battlefield for survivors. She felt fear grip her throat, but beside her, the human was loading his rifle, his broken arm trembling but strong. "You rest," he said quietly. "I'll handle it." She stared at him, disbelief in her voice. "You can barely stand." He smiled faintly. "Then I'll shoot from the ground." A moment later, the shadows drew closer. The first enemy appeared through the smoke, and the human fired. Each shot precise, each motion calm despite his injuries. Saralyn covered her ears as the echoes filled the air. When it was over, she looked out. The shadows were gone. Silence returning to the ruins, she turned to him, his head leaning back against the wall, his chest rising and falling slowly. "You're impossible," she whispered. He chuckled weakly. "Yeah. We get that a lot." She stared at him for a long time. the sound of the battlefield fading completely now, replaced by the faint wind. The medic in her was still terrified. But something else had taken root. Admiration, because for the first time, she saw what the galaxy whispered about in fear and wonder. Humans, creatures who broke, bled, and burned, but refused to stay down. As the twin suns rose over the horizon, their light touching the shattered land, Saralyn sat beside the human, still watching him breathe. He was half dead, covered in blood, his bones barely holding together. But in that moment, he looked stronger than any soldier she had ever known, and somewhere deep inside, she realized she had just witnessed something sacred. Not a miracle, not a weapon, but the simple, terrifying truth of humanity. They did not survive because they were the strongest. They survived because they would rather die standing than live on their knees. The battlefield was quiet now. Only the wind moved through the wreckage, carrying dust and the faint smell of burning metal. Saralyn sat inside the ruined shelter, watching the human as he slept. His chest rose and fell in slow rhythm, his hand still gripping the weapon even in dreams. The light from the rising suns cut across his face, showing scars that told more stories than any words could. She had seen soldiers before. She had seen courage before, but nothing like him. Her people's warriors used pain suppressors, body armor, regeneration serums. This man had none of those, and yet he lived. And not just lived, and he had fought, crawled, bled, and refused to die. Her heart still raced when she remembered the sound of his bones snapping back into place. Her people's medics fainted at that kind of sight. He had done it to himself and kept breathing like it was nothing. She whispered softly to herself, "What are you? Human?" Her scanner beeped quietly beside her, showing his vitals and dangerously unstable, but his body was already trying to heal. His heartbeats were irregular but strong. It didn't make sense. According to her medical training, this man should be dead, and yet he wasn't. Hours passed. Saralyn found herself studying him, sketching notes in her medical pad. Pain threshold extreme, she wrote. Adrenal response adaptive. She paused, unsure how to describe the rest. Willpower beyond measurable. When the human stirred, she jumped. His eyes opened slowly, still sharp even through exhaustion. "How long was I out?" he muttered, voice dry and rough. 3 hours, she replied. Handing him a flask of water, he took it and drank, nodding in thanks. "You're still here," he said. "Should I have left?" she asked. Half defensive, he smirked faintly. Most would. Something in that smile unsettled her. Not arrogance, but truth. Her people always said humans were reckless, primitive, dangerous, but sitting there, looking at him, she saw something else. Something simple and terrifying. He wasn't fearless. He just chose to move through fear. Saralyn cleaned the blood from his arm. When she touched his skin, she flinched, and it was hot, his body burning with fever. "You need rest," she said softly. He shook his head. "Can't. There might still be scouts out there. You won't survive another fight." He smiled again, faint but steady. "Then I'll die standing." Her hands froze. She looked into his eyes, and for the first time, she saw something that made her breath catch. He meant it, every word. He would crawl into another battle if that's what it took. She sat back, unsure what to say. In her world, death was something to avoid. In his, it was something to face with open eyes. It was madness, but also something greater, something she couldn't name. As night fell again, she tended his wounds. He spoke softly, telling stories of his people, not about victories, but about endurance. He told her about climbing frozen mountains with broken bones, about explorers who crossed burning deserts just to find water for others, about soldiers who held the line for days so that one more child could live. Saralyn listened quietly, her eyes wide. "You suffer so much," she whispered. He chuckled lightly. "Yeah," he said, "but we laugh too." The way he said it, simple, human, unshaken, left her speechless. She had studied hundreds of species, all built on logic or survival. But these humans, they were built on emotion. They felt deeper, hurt harder, and yet somehow kept going. Later, as he drifted back to sleep, Saralyn looked at him again. There was no armor left to hide behind, no machine protecting him, just fragile flesh and unbreakable spirit, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel superior, she felt small. She thought about her people, who avoided pain, who numbed their fear, and she wondered if maybe, just maybe, that was why humans kept surviving when others didn't. They didn't hide from the fire, they walked through it. She reached out and brushed her fingers lightly across his hand. His skin was warm, alive. "You are strange," she whispered. "Strange and strong." Outside, the stars began to move across the sky, the twin suns sinking below the horizon. In that fading light, Saralyn made a quiet decision. She would protect this human, not just because he saved her, but because he had shown her something no book or teacher ever could, what true courage looked like. And somewhere deep in her chest a feeling grew. Not fear, not pity, something closer to awe, because in that quiet moment, under the dim starlight and smoke-filled wind, Saralyn finally understood the whispers that echoed across the galaxy. Why aliens feared humans, it wasn't their strength, their weapons, or their rage. It was something far more dangerous. Their will to keep breathing no matter what it cost. The second dawn came quietly. Faint light poured through the cracks of the ruined shelter, touching the soldier's face with a soft glow. Saralyn sat near him, silent, her medical tablet resting on her knees. She had spent the night running scans, taking notes, trying to understand how a being made of fragile tissue could survive what should have killed him. None of it made sense. Every cell in his body screamed exhaustion, yet his heart still beat steady, like it refused to quit. When his eyes opened, she flinched. "You never really sleep, do you?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Not when the world's still burning." She tilted her head, confused. "Even after victory, humans keep fighting." He shrugged, wincing from his ribs. "It's how we heal," she frowned. "That's not healing. That's punishment." He looked at her, his eyes calm but old. "Maybe, but it works." There was silence between them for a while. The soft hum of the wind, the faint crackle of distant fire. Finally, Saralyn spoke again. "My people say strength is measured by peace." He smirked lightly. "Then they've never seen a human lose something they love." She blinked. "Love." He nodded slowly. "Love, duty, family. Doesn't matter. It's all the same thing that keeps us moving." Saralyn looked at him closely. "So that's your secret?" "Emotion," he chuckled weakly. "It's not a secret. It's a burden." His voice softened. "But it's the reason we don't stop. Not even when it hurts." She thought about that. Her people avoided attachment, avoided pain. They said emotion made the mind weak. Yet sitting beside him, she felt the complete opposite. His pain made him stronger. His emotions made him unstoppable. Saralyn leaned forward, curiosity overtaking caution. "Why did you even come to this war?" He didn't answer immediately. His gaze drifted toward the broken horizon. "When I joined the Corps, I thought it was about protecting humanity." He exhaled, voice low. "But it's not just that, it's about proving that our lives mean something, even out here." He looked back at her. "When you've lost everything, you fight to make sure someone else doesn't." His words lingered like smoke. Saralyn lowered her eyes. "We don't fight like that," she admitted quietly. "For us, battle is duty, not meaning." He smiled sadly. "That's why you lose." The honesty cut her deeper than she expected. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. Her people fought for rules, for structure, for pride. Humans fought for one another, for something beyond themselves. She whispered, "You're strange creatures. You fight for hope in places where it doesn't exist." He laughed softly. "Yeah, hope's kind of our bad habit." For the first time, she smiled. It surprised her, the warmth of it. She wasn't supposed to like him, she reminded herself. He was a soldier of another species, a rival. But as she looked at him, half broken, half smiling, she felt something she hadn't in years. Respect later as the sun dipped low again. Ryan Hale, she had finally learned his name, tried to stand. His leg was still damaged, but he refused her help. "I need to check the perimeter," he said. "You can't even walk properly," she argued. "Doesn't matter," he said. She sighed. "You humans never stop." He smiled faintly. "Stopping's the first step to dying." She watched him limp out into the fading light, rifle slung over his shoulder. Every step looked painful, but there was no hesitation. No weakness, just will, pure and relentless. When he returned hours later, blood ran down his arm again. Saralyn rushed forward, scolding him. "You're tearing your wounds open." He looked down and shrugged. "Guess I wasn't careful," she glared. "Do you ever care about yourself?" He paused for a moment, his face suddenly serious. "I do," he said softly. "But not before everyone else." She froze, his words echoing in her mind like a truth she had never heard before. That night, while he slept, She recorded a message in her medical logs. Observation 73, she whispered into her device. Humans are not fearless, they fear everything. Death, pain, loss, and yet they act anyway. She hesitated, then added, This is not strength of body, it is strength of purpose, and perhaps it is the most powerful thing in the galaxy. Her eyes shifted to him as he slept. The lines on his face soft now. The constant tension finally gone, she whispered quietly. You live by pain, you fight by hope, and you rest only when the stars do. Outside, thunder rolled across the barren land. A storm gathering on the horizon. Saralyn stood at the entrance, watching it, and for the first time, she didn't feel afraid because somewhere deep inside, she finally understood what made humans terrifying. It wasn't their weapons, their fire or their rage, it was their code. Unwritten, unbreakable. Never stop, never surrender, never die quiet. And as lightning flashed across the dark sky, she whispered to herself, I think I understand you now, human. The night was thick with ash and lightning. Thunder rolled across the battlefield ruins like the sound of ancient drums. Saralyn couldn't sleep. Something in the air felt wrong, cold, alive. Her scanner blinked red, motion detected beyond the ridge. She froze. Ryan, she whispered, shaking him gently. He woke instantly. His instincts sharper than pain. What is it? Movement. Multiple, she said. Maybe scavengers? Maybe worse. He pushed himself upright, wincing as his ribs protested. Scavengers don't move in formation, he muttered. He reached for his weapon, hands trembling. But steady enough to fight, Saralyn grabbed his wrist. Her voice trembling. You can't. You're still bleeding. He looked at her, calm and unshaken. Doesn't matter. Before she could argue, a distant explosion shook the ground. Dust fell from the ceiling, rocks crumbling around them. Saralyn's heart raced. They found us. Ryan nodded slowly, checking his rifle. Then we make it hard for them to keep us. He limped to the doorway. Every step heavy outside, flashes of red light cut through the smoke. Alien soldiers, survivors of the enemy faction, searching for signs of life. Saralyn grabbed her medical kit and crawled to cover, her hand shaking. Ryan crouched behind a half-broken pillar. Eyes scanning the darkness, he took one deep breath and whispered to himself, All right, let's dance. The first shot came. A streak of plasma tearing through the night. Ryan ducked, returned fire, his aim precise. Every recoil sent pain through his broken arm. But he didn't stop. His face twisted, not in agony, but in focus. He fought like a machine built from stubbornness and defiance. Saralyn watched, unable to breathe. She had seen soldiers fight, but never like this. Each time he was hit, he just gritted his teeth and kept going. No fear, no hesitation, just will. A blast hit the wall near him. Throwing him back, Saralyn screamed. Running to his side, his armor smoked. Blood streaked his chest. Ryan, you can't keep this up, she cried. He coughed, spitting blood but smiling. Don't worry, Doc. This is just a warm-up. Another explosion thundered outside. More soldiers closing in, surrounding the shelter. Saralyn's panic turned to desperation. There are too many, she said. He shook his head slowly, eyes cold and sharp. There's always too many. He pushed himself up, using the wall for balance. You stay behind cover, he said firmly. She grabbed his arm. You'll die. He met her gaze steady. Then I'll die standing. And before she could stop him, he stepped into the storm. Lightning flashed across his armor. Painting him in white fire, he fired again and again, his shouts drowned by thunder and plasma. Every shot precise, every movement filled with pain and power. The enemies advanced, but for every step they took, he made them pay for it. Saralyn couldn't look away. She didn't see a wounded man anymore. She saw something else, something terrifying and beautiful, a creature that refused to bow. A heartbeat that screamed not yet when the smoke cleared. The ground outside was covered in shadows. Dozens of enemy bodies lay silent in the ash. Ryan stood in the middle, his rifle empty, his breath shallow. Then his knees gave out and he collapsed. Saralyn ran to him, catching his head before it hit the ground. His face was pale, blood pooling beneath him. Ryan, she said, tears blurring her vision. He opened one eye, smiling weakly. Did we win? She nodded quickly, pressing her hands to his chest to stop the bleeding. Yes, but you're... He interrupted softly. Still here, she sobbed quietly. You're insane. He chuckled faintly. Humans usually are. His body was cold now. His pulse fading, Saralyn tore open her medical pack. Desperate, but nothing worked. His wounds were too deep, his body too broken. "Don't close your eyes," she said frantically. "Don't you dare stop now." He looked at her, his gaze soft. "You sound like me." Her hands trembled as she pressed the healing patch to his skin. Tears streaked her face as she whispered, "Why do you fight like this?" He blinked slowly. "Because if I don't, someone else will have to." Then he smiled weakly. "And I hate making others do my work." His voice cracked into silence, his chest barely moving. Saralyn froze, staring at him. "No, no, no," she whispered. She slammed her palms against his chest. "Breathe, human," she cried. "Breathe." For a long moment. Nothing then. A faint pulse, her scanner blinked. His heartbeat flickering like a dying flame. She laughed through tears. "You stubborn fool," she whispered. "You just refuse to die." Outside, the storm finally broke. Rain began to fall, washing blood and ash into the earth. Saralyn sat beside him, holding his hand. Her people had always told her humans were dangerous, unpredictable, chaotic. Now she finally understood why. Because they didn't just live, they endured. She looked down at him, his breathing faint but steady, and whispered, "You win, human." Her voice cracked. "You win." The storm passed slowly. Rain washed over the battlefield, turning ash into rivers of gray mud. The fires died, the air cooled, and for the first time in days, silence fell like a blanket. Saralyn sat beside the human, his head resting on her lap. His body was broken, his armor shattered, his breath faint, but still there, still fighting. She looked down at him, eyes filled with exhaustion and awe. "You're impossible," she whispered. His lips moved slightly, forming the ghost of a smile. "Not impossible," he murmured weakly, "just human." His voice faded again, and she realized how quiet everything had become. No soldiers, no enemies, no commands. Just the two of them and the echo of what he had done. She pressed her hand to his chest, feeling the heartbeat that refused to stop, each pulse weaker than the last, yet steady, defiant. Every beat was a message. "I'm still here." When rescue finally came, it was too late for most. Ships from both sides descended through the clouds. Lights cutting through the smoke, medics rushed forward, pulling survivors from the rubble. When they reached Saralyn, they froze. An alien medic holding a human soldier like he was her brother. The sight silenced the entire landing team. She stood slowly, her hands covered in his blood. "He needs care," she said firmly. A human officer stepped forward, his weapon half lowered. You saved him." She shook her head. "No," she said softly. "He saved me." They lifted him onto a stretcher. "Connecting tubes and monitors," one of the medics whispered. "He shouldn't be alive." Saralyn looked at them and replied, "That's what you all keep saying." For hours, she stayed by his side as the ship ascended through the clouds. Machines beeped around them, measuring his heart, that same rhythm she'd memorized. When the doctors told her he might not wake again, she only smiled faintly. "Then you don't know him," she said. Days turned into weeks. The human soldier's story spread like wildfire across both armies. The alien medics who had once feared him now spoke of him with reverence. They called him the Unbroken Human, the one who fought with shattered bones, who stood when even the machines failed, the one who showed the galaxy that strength was not born from power, but from will. Saralyn was summoned to speak before the High Council of her world. They demanded an explanation. How a human could endure so much pain. How one life could inspire peace talks between enemies. She stood in the Great Hall, facing the elders who had trained her to fear emotion, and she said simply, "I met a creature who turned suffering into purpose, and pain into hope." Her voice shook. "You told me humans were reckless," she said. "But they are something greater." She looked up, tears shining in her eyes. "They are the reminder that even in pain, life fights to live." Her words were recorded, shared, and remembered soon. The phrase, "the unbroken human," became a symbol, not of war, but of survival. It appeared on banners on ships, and in songs sung by children across colonies. The story of the soldier who refused to die, and the alien medic who watched it happen, became legend. Months later, Ryan Hale opened his eyes for the first time since the battle. The room was quiet, bright, filled with machines. He turned his head weakly, and there she was, sitting beside him. "You look awful," he whispered, voice cracked but smiling. Saralyn laughed softly, relief flooding her face. So do you. He tried to sit up, grimacing. You didn't leave, he said. Neither did you, she answered. They both smiled, tired, broken but alive. He reached for her hand, his grip weak but warm. What now, he asked. She looked out the window at the stars. Now, she said, they talk of peace. And they talk of you, he frowned. Me? She nodded. The unbroken human, she said. Almost reverently, he laughed quietly, shaking his head. Sounds dramatic, she smiled. It is. But so are you. He looked at her for a moment, then out at the stars beyond. Guess it's a good thing I didn't stay down, he murmured. Saralyn nodded. No, she said softly. It's a good thing you stood back up, outside. Two fleets that once fired upon each other now drifted in the same orbit. Flags changed, walls fell, and for the first time in generations, there was quiet among the stars because one human's defiance had done what weapons could not. It had reminded the galaxy that pain was not the end. It was the beginning of strength years later. Children from both worlds would read about the battle. They would learn of the human soldier who smiled through pain, and the alien medic who saw humanity not as monsters, but as mirrors of their own potential. And every time someone whispered the phrase, the unbroken human, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter, because somewhere out there in the endless dark, a heartbeat still echoed soft, steady, unyielding, still here.